Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final session of the first day of COP28. I'm really pleased to be here to welcome you to this panel. I just want to say a word about the Ocean Pavilion. We started with the World Economic Forum having an event at 11 o'clock, and I was actually a little bit worried. You know, it's the first day, first meeting. Will we have enough people? And it was absolutely jam-packed, and I'm pleased to see so many of you still here in the meeting. My name is Kilaparti Ramakrishna. I'm the director of the Marine Policy Center from the WHOI Oceanographic Institution, and this is we are one of the lead partners of organizing members of this Ocean Pavilion. We have a number of partners, and you see them all there. The only reason I'm here is to say thank you to all of you for being here, and to say that we have an absolutely fantastic panel. And my colleague Hauke, who is moderating the session, will introduce all of them. But I just want to say a couple of words about two panelists in particular. Trista, who is online. Trista, can you see us, hear us? Oh, wonderful. And then WHOI, who was introduced already this morning, and everybody complimented her on her birthday. But what I want to do is, in addition to saying that, both Trista and Game are the Time 100 climate leaders. And so we're delighted to have you, and congratulations to both of you. And then, of course, we have several leaders, and I want to start with our colleague from Rwanda. Rwanda is one of the sponsors of the resolution in the United Nations Environment Assembly that started us off on the plastics negotiations, and Tony Wabi and Simon Reddy from Mindaru Foundation and Pew Charitable Trust have been really leading this effort in terms of getting all the details right so that we have an agreement that we could really rely upon to solve not only the plastics problem, but also contribute to climate solutions. With that, let me just say a word of introduction of my colleague, Hauke Kite-Powell. He is a senior research specialist in the Marine Policy Center, and he will be taking it from here and then leading the session for the rest of the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rama, and welcome everyone on behalf of the WHOI Oceanographic Institution and all our partners in the Ocean Pavilion. And you're to be commended on your stamina for being here at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on this first day. I hope you pace yourself and keep it up for 2 weeks or however long you're going to be here. As Rama said, we have a very distinguished panel, and I will do my best to get out of the way so that you can hear from them. I do want to just briefly motivate the topic here today. We're talking about plastics and the challenge of managing plastics and plastic waste in the context of also managing climate. And those two things are related. The plastics problem is becoming more and more prominent. It's a more recent arrival to the conversation in a way than climate. But it is, in some ways, also very urgent. And one of the ways that plastics and the fossil fuels that drive the climate problem are connected is in their origins, of course. They both come from fossil hydrocarbons. About 400 million tons a year of those are turned into plastics. That's a relatively small fraction of what we burn and put into the atmosphere, but nonetheless, it contributes to the climate issues. The other thing that I think links plastics and fossil fuels is that they're both economically tremendously valuable. Our lifestyle today is difficult to imagine without plastics, just as it is difficult to imagine without fossil fuels. And yet, that process of getting to a vision for a world where that's not true anymore is, in some sense, what we're here for. And understanding the economic value of these commodities, the role that they play in our economy today, is very important as a starting point for thinking about how to shift away from them. And of course, the reason why it's important to shift away from them is that another commonality between the fossil fuels we burn and the plastics we use and then dispose of is that particularly, but not only in the disposal part of that process, they enter the environment as waste products and impose costs on the ecosystems that they affect and ultimately on people as well. And they both do this in part in the oceans, which is why this is an appropriate topic for this venue and this community. It also shows clearly, I think, that neither climate, neither fossil fuel climate issues, nor plastic and plastic waste issues can be solved unilaterally by individual nations, because the sinks into which the waste products eventually wander are linked globally, and they move these pollutants around. We're all affected by them, and we need to work together to solve them. There are, I think, strong implications of managing one without thinking about the other. Half of the 400 million tons of plastics we use each year, at least, is for packaging and more or less single use. If we stop doing that, we have to find an alternative way to transport those goods. And that has energy and climate implications. So these things, I think, are inextricably linked. And to help us sort through that and how we can come to a resolution of these issues, we're going to now turn to the panel. And let me first invite up a distinguished representative from the country, as Rama said, that was instrumental in getting the plastic treaty negotiations underway. He's the Deputy Director General of Rwanda's Environmental Management Agency, Mr. Faustin Munyazikwiye. I hope I did that okay. Please. Would you like to sit or come to? You have the mic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, moderator, for giving us the floor. As highlighted, I'm representing Rwanda Environment Management Authority, which is a government agency in charge of environment and climate change in Rwanda. And as you all know, plastic is one of the key challenge we are now facing. Single-use plastic. Since 1950, 9.2 billion tons of plastic waste have been generated. That number itself, it is shocking. But to get rid of it or to manage it efficiently, we need to adopt various approach. One is top-down, where we need to meet, especially through the multilateralism, like the way Rwanda is also one of the countries which co-sponsored the global treaty. So one of the way is to come together and have a common understanding on the impacts of plastics, not only on our environment, but also on the climate. So touching on the impacts of plastics on the climate, as highlighted, In Rwanda, we started the discussion on banning the single-use plastics in 2004. That's when we started to raise awareness. In 2008, we established a law banning the use and manufacturing, importation and exportation of polythene bags. We started with the polythene bags because that time we had so many polythene bags which used to package most of the commodities. Even those commodities which are not meant to be packaged, but they were used to be in those bags. So we established that law, but at the same time, we also build the capacity in terms of doing recycling because we didn't have the capacity of having alternative packaging. Then in 2019, that's when, after 10 years, Rwanda established a new law on single-use, banning the use, importation, and manufacturing of all single-use plastics. Now we graduated from polythene bags to the single-use plastics. So I started saying that to solve this, we need top-down approach, but on the other hand, we also need to start from home, to put in place legal and regulatory frameworks which are helping us at least to regulate the use, the manufacturing of those single-use plastics. Second, we need also to build the capacity of our private sector to see this sector as one of the sectors which can offer them an opportunity of doing business, be it in the recycling or be it in the providing alternative packaging, especially for developing countries where we don't have those alternative packaging. Third, we also need to think about technology transfer. In Rwanda, we have been struggling to get even alternative packaging. What our law is only accepting the home compostable materials. But as of now, we don't have an industry in Rwanda which can make those home compostable materials for packaging. So that's a key challenge. And it is giving us a hard time of giving exception use of single-use plastic, and which is increasing again the plastics. So how do we link in Rwanda the plastics and then the climate? In our NDC, in our National Determined Contribution in Rwanda, we have an ambitious target of reducing 38% of our emissions by 2030. But when you look at the different sectors which are contributing to those emissions, we also have emissions which are coming from waste management, where we see people burning those plastics. So as he highlighted, the major impact or the major issue we are facing now are plastics which are being burnt in different corners of the country. It's an illegal activity, but if you burn one or two, it contributes or exacerbates the uh, the the increase of emissions. So all the activities we are conducting, either for mitigation activities, reducing emissions, we have to take into consideration reducing or even, if possible, avoiding the use of single-use plastics, or focusing on handling them in a way that they are not contributing to emissions. Apart from mitigation, we are looking also on the side of adaptation. Some of the challenges we are facing related to climate change is floods and landslides. When you are talking about floods, most of the runoff and erosion, they come with all the plastics in the watershed, and then up to downstream. So downstream, we have wetlands. And as you all know, wetlands serve for filtration of water, serve for water holding, and also flood management. So if they bring all the plastics and they cover the entire land, then it can't be fertile again. And most of our countries, in developing countries, we are depending on agriculture. And those wetlands, they are the main areas where we are practicing our agriculture. So those are also on the side of adaptation, where plastics can also hamper the production in terms of adaptation. Thank you. Thank you. Let me pause there. Moderator, it's your role to welcome the new guest.
Thank you very much for those words. That was a great way to start us off. And welcome to the panel, Inger Anderson. Very glad you were able to join us. And we will hear from you very shortly. But next up, we have Tony Werby, who is chief scientist and I think also CEO of, no, not anymore. Okay.
Just chief scientist.
Okay. At the Minderoo Foundation, which is a key player in the world of trying to get a handle on plastics as well. And so we're very pleased to have Tony here with us. And Tony, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Hauke, and thanks everyone for being here late in the day on day one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time restating the problem. I think the vast majority of people in this room understand only too well the challenges that we're facing with plastics pollution. What I will point out, and I have a hard copy of a great report that Minderoo put out earlier this year called the Plastic Waste Makers Index, is that it shows that the compound annual growth rate for single-use plastics is still going up by almost 3% year on year. And so the challenge that we have is that there's far greater awareness of the problem of plastic pollution. I often say, thank goodness we can see it, because I think if we couldn't see it, it wouldn't be the Trojan horse that we need it to be for so many of the issues that we're trying to solve. But of course, the challenge with it is that it goes so far beyond what we can see, because it is a big climate driver because of the emissions that are associated with the production of plastic, and it is a big factor in long-term human health, and an increasing number of studies are pointing to the impacts on human health of our relationship with plastics, and in particular, not just the micro and nanoparticles of plastic, but the 10,000 and more chemicals that are in the production of plastics that ultimately leach into our bloodstream. And so there are some great reports that have come out through the year. The Minderoo Monaco report on plastics and human health. We've done some work on supply chain transparency and the financial exposure that a lot of companies have to the problems associated with plastic. They're all on our website, and I really commend you. If you're interested in digging down into this problem, we pride ourselves on being an advocacy-based or an evidence-based advocacy organisation, and in order to be able to do that, we really put a lot of effort into the science that is behind our advocacy. So what are we going to do about it? The challenge is really immense, as has been mentioned several times. And we are at a moment in time where we have a potential through a global plastics treaty to really do something incredibly different in the future than the way that we've been behaving as human beings up until now. The Global Plastics Treaty really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I think, for us to reimagine our relationship with plastics and to do a whole lot of things differently going forward. But of course, I think, again, as we all know, there's just no one single silver bullet to solve the plastics crisis. We are trying to focus our effort as far up the supply chain as we possibly can, recognising that if we don't actually turn the tap off on virgin polymers, then we're never going to solve the problems that we've got. If the Global Plastics Treaty doesn't enable us to turn that tap down and ultimately turn it off, obviously we're always going to have plastics in our lives. Nobody needs to convince me that there's a lot of great and wonderful things that plastics helps us with, but a lot of our consumption and our use of plastic is unnecessary, and a lot of it, I think with the right innovation, can actually be very, very significantly reduced. And because so many of the emissions are in the upstream production of plastic, that's, I think, where we really need to focus a lot of our effort. So I just want to put out there a slightly crazy idea that we've been thinking about and promoting and doing some work on, because we're probably at the point now where we need slightly crazy ideas, and this one is about what it would take to impose a global plastic pollution fee on virgin polymers when they're produced. Now, a lot of people tell me that it's an impossible thing to do. It's been tried perhaps in other contexts and hasn't worked. But my feeling is that we've done a really extraordinary job of global pollution. So we should be able to have a crack at a global solution as well. And I think some innovative thinking around how you would impose a fee on the producers of virgin polymers. That fee, and a lot of details need to be worked through, but could be collected, it could be distributed to countries that are grappling with this problem. It could be used to invest in alternative materials to plastic. It could be used to invest in better recycling infrastructure. There are many ways in which the collection of a fee of that nature could be used for, driving the kinds of solutions that we're looking at. So we are doing a whole lot of economic modelling on this at the moment. We have a discussion paper that came out about the time of the Global Plastics Summit in Bangkok a little while ago. We welcome input to it. It's something we're really trying to refine as we go through the various INC processes. But it is absolutely something that we think will help ultimately commoditise plastic, because obviously some of that price signal will flow through the supply chain, but it does start to hold the producers accountable for the pollution that they create. I think we all know that does not sit on their balance sheets currently. It's pollution that is absorbed by the global community with really no compensation offered at all for humanity. So that's something that we can perhaps drive as a discussion. Again, we really welcome input on the discussion paper that we've got out there. All I would close by saying is that we need some really bold solutions in this space. Incremental improvements are not going to get us to where we need to be, either from a pollution perspective or from an emissions perspective. I think, the more we can just take off our business as usual hats and think about some really innovative, out-of-the-box ideas, then I think we can generate a really positive discussion. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And speaking as an economist, I have to say I like your idea, and I hope we can come back to it a little bit later. For now, we're going to have another global perspective on the issue from the Managing Director of the Center for Nature and Climate at the World Economic Forum. Kim-Wei Neo, please. Lord.
Thank you. I know I'm speaking to an expert audience, but I thought it's important to just highlight 5 points, right, which I feel may not get enough attention, and I think we need to keep emphasizing this to the global community. One is that plastic is a visible as well as an invisible or not so obvious problem, right? Every year we are dumping 14 million tons of plastic into the ocean. But then if you work it out to truckloads per day, you're talking about at least 3 truckloads just dumped into the ocean on a daily basis. That needs to go out, like clear, loud, right? And then people can get a sense of the severity of the issue. But the second layer, which tends to be less well known, except among expert audiences, is the issue of microplastics, right? And it's going everywhere. Right, it's going into the waters, the rivers, it's carried by the ocean, right? It's going into the soil, which means that it's going into our food. And given that food systems are global, it means that all of us are not immune to this invisible menace, right? And I think increasingly there are more and more signs, alarming signs, talking about how this even sits with mothers, pregnant mothers, right? Pregnant women, right? And hence it actually carries across generations, which is very disturbing, right? And I think this science needs to go out more clearly, loudly to the general population, which brings me to the second point, which is that it is very intimately linked to human health and well-being. It's not a developing economy problem. It is actually tied to every one of our health, or is in the water, is in the air, right? And it's in our physical environment. And the third point is that the UN Plastic Treaty negotiations, I think, is a very, very important milestone, not just because it's a UN process, but because it is an opportunity for us to really put this high on the agenda. I know climate is taking a lot of time and energy from every community, but really the plastic negotiations is a good time for us to really emphasize some of these key messages. Right, that this is not just a UN problem or solution that they're going to bring to the table. It will help a lot. It's not a government problem. It is everybody's problem, and we really need, which is my 4th point, all stakeholders to get involved. Right, whether this is corporate, and this is where the World Economic Forum is leaning in. Davos, plastic is going to be one of the top issues on our agenda, on top of climate and nature. Right, we need to engage companies, we need to engage civil society, science, to translate this into very tangible action. And obviously, mobilizing all stakeholders, the last thing is obviously we know that systems change is needed, right? Because you can't have a situation where everybody is just waiting for someone else to move first, right? And when I think systems change, I like to think of the 5 dimensions, which I kind of was alluded to, right? Obviously, policy. The UN negotiations will be very, very helpful in that regard. Markets, the challenge is, the reality today is that the numbers are still not working out. So we need to find a way to close that gap. The economies will need to be a lot more creative in how they think about demand and supply, right? How do you actually create new markets, right? Or different markets to shift consumption production patterns, finance, right? And I know headline news is always X dollar is needed to solve what crisis, but finance will flow, right, if the market conditions are right, right? But again, there's no excuse for financial players. They also need to think out of the box into how they can deploy and think very different time horizons when it comes to investing into solutions that are needed for humanity, right? Money has to serve mankind, not the other way around. Right, the 4th is, which was alluded to, is the need for technology, right? And I think tech solutions will enable the scale and the speed that's needed. And the last point, which is kind of a hidden point, right, but it was alluded to as well, is the point on culture, right? It takes a long time to shift habits, right? But I think we really need to double down on getting the culture dimension of behaviors to change quite drastically, right? And I know we can, right? There are many examples in history that's proven how by pressing the lever of culture, and I'd like to talk about food, fashion, arts, sports, entertainment, things that unite all of us and get us all inspired and excited, right? Let's activate culture as a way to think about this invisible and visible menace or challenge. And I like the point that Tony was making, right, which is my way to close my remarks around crazy ideas. Because that's exactly what I wrote down. We talk to business a lot, and they always tell us that, look, they're facing a trilemma. On climate, they have a trilemma. They need to think energy security, energy affordability, and environmental issues, right? And if you can't close this nexus, it's very hard to move, right? Same for plastic, right? We have to think about the environment, but at the same time, we also need to think about access, affordability issues. We need to get very practical around growth and development challenges, right? And in order to solve all three, if it's that easy, it would have been done already. The fact that it's not been done already means that we really need to get very innovative and almost crazy in solving for that, right? And when I spoke about technology, there's a lot of good innovations out there, and I meet a lot of the startups. But I think what we are lacking is more innovation in policy, right? We need more innovation in business models, right? We need more innovation in communications, in cultural norms, right? And how do we think about inventing jobs for the future that can actually create a more virtuous connection across the three dimensions, as opposed to saying this is a trilemma and one is a trade-off over the other. But really, I think if we don't make it as an optionality, but as a requirement, right, then I think we will be able to find our way to get to that sweet spot of people, planet, and prosperity, right? So I'm very hopeful about the future, even though I know this global stocktake at COP28 is going to show us that we are way behind. But it's not a bad idea to say that, look, we're way behind. Then maybe everyone will get a little bit more creative and out of the box and innovative, crazy in thinking about and inventing that future forward. So on that, I'll pass it back to...
Thank you very much, Gimwei. I like the optimism, and your focus on tech and tech innovation is a perfect segue to our next panelist, Trista Patterson, who's joining us virtually on the screen, is the Director of Sustainability at Microsoft and Xbox, and I'm looking forward to her comments on this topic. Trista?
Hi there, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And also, I've been hearing about so much of the work of so many of the other panelists today. So it's really fun. Faustin, I've been hearing about your work recently in the past few weeks on the Kigali work for plastics agreements. And Tony, I really like your concept of taxing on the supply side of plastic. At Microsoft, we've got some experience with the taxation in carbon internal to private sector, so I can share some observations on that front. And Jim, you had mentioned the cultural element, and that for me obviously is really exciting because the old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We might come up with lots of wonderful ideas for how we're going to deal with plastic waste. But if the culture isn't there, then we're in trouble in the long run. And so currently I sit in Microsoft. I run sustainability for Microsoft across Xbox. Xbox is one of the major business groups within Microsoft. It's also the driver of one of the largest portions of Scope 3 emissions, and it also drives many of the consumptive devices that are used that also include plastics, both in the device itself as well as packaging. So the elements that I work through oversee everything from sustainable design to the supply chain in which we deal with emissions in the manufacturing, to the delivery and distribution of the products, to the creation of end of life and how that gets taken back from consumers, the consumer experience. And then most recently, we've been really hard at work about greening game code and working on ways to implement AI into improving against so many of the goals where Microsoft has put out some really important benchmarks and finish lines, notably to be carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste by 2030. All of that, of course, comes together in a really perfect storm. And one of the great ways in which this panel is so relevant to me personally and all of the teams in which I work with is because in order to create a private sector product that reduces emissions, but it also has increased ability for repairability and recyclability of that product, and it's also uptaking as much post-consumer content in the material, that's a very complex multi-factor analysis. I come from a background of US government experience with the federal government in Department of Agriculture doing standard carbon accounting and valuation of ecosystem services. Then I went to work for Inger in an extended unit called Grid Arendal. It was a support unit that deals with communication for UN environment. And that's where I, in the aim of looking for ways to reduce delivery of environmental information, stumbled upon the outrageous statistics coming from the gaming sector. And we founded an organization that still now joins together about the activity of about 3 billion video gamers worldwide across all of the different companies that are members. The video game industry is a cultural juggernaut. It has an economic impact of $340 billion this past year alone, which is larger than Hollywood, Bollywood, sports, cinema. All of those combined do not add to the same kind of economic impact, and yet it is one of those things that is very much under the radar. So when we think about the ways in which we can raise awareness and engage consumers, gaming actually is one of those bizarre ways in which we can begin to create discussion and also this exchange of information between the consumers, the private sector in creation of the devices, but also the supply chain further upstream for all of those different ways in which we can engage productively. There were a number of questions put out to the panel, and some of the things that it called to mind were the importance of the default settings. Plastic is so much a default setting, and those defaults were all set at a time when we didn't care and weren't so concerned about either plastic or climate. And now what is an overlooked opportunity is that many of those default settings don't actually make either economic sense, nor are they particularly resonant with the consumer. So if you think about the ways in which at one point a gamer would purchase a disc, 55 grams of plastic, these days some consumers still like that. The video game sector still creates them in some cases, but when you get it home and you put it in your device, what happens is that it connects to the internet and it winds up downloading the most recent version from the cloud anyway. That piece of plastic is just a placeholder. We think about all the different ways in which we have those kinds of placeholders. A second area is things like gift cards. Just last year, we eliminated plastic in gift cards, reducing about 500,000 kilograms of plastic waste and about 200 million plastic bags that were completely unnecessary to the consumer experience. I wanted to touch on two different products, which I think are useful in changing the perspective. One is the Ocean Plastic Mouse. That is not a gaming device. It is for PC and laptop, but it was the introduction of recycled plastic waste. And those of you who are familiar with the volume of ocean plastic waste, you might think, well, what's even the point of doing something that it's just a drop in the bucket, right? But what's interesting about the experiments and the development of that particular device is that it got new materials in the hands of consumers, and private sector, Microsoft, and therefore all of our partners across the tech sector, were able to find different ways in which that product resonated with consumers, how they liked the fact that there was swirling patterns, they liked the feel of it in their hands. And that allowed us to develop something this year called the Remix controller. That's a gaming device specifically. It's used by recycled uptake of plastic, and by taking the pieces and regrinding it into mixtures, we can also create customized products for consumers. These are really unique opportunities because special editions of things like a controller can allow us to experiment with very different forms of creating materials that then allow us to open the doors to very large investments for very large products in large volumes later on. So those experimental opportunities are there. I'm going to close because I know that time is short on this panel, but the last thing that I wanted to say is that in the policy realm, we always tend to look at private sector as being the reluctant participants in generating solutions. And we understand this intuitively because those solutions are expensive. Yet what is underappreciated in the public sector is how much line of sight can open up the pricing and opportunities from the private sector. The longer line of sight you can give private sector or individual companies on the way in which either policy or supply is unfolding or consumer demand is unfolding, the easier it is to bring price down, and oftentimes radically. Engineers, they love and relish those gnarly problems to unpack, like that multi-factor analysis that I was speaking of. And that opens up a lot of opportunity to engage some of our brightest minds from the engineering and private sector to create some of those solutions that then deliver the product into the consumer hand and raise more awareness. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Trista. I think a game that involves taxes on plastic feedstocks is one that I might actually buy. Next, we will hear from Simon Reddy. Simon is the Director for International Environment at the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Thank you, Hauke, and apologies, I find it easier to stand. So, first of all, thank you very much for pleasure to be able to speak to you this afternoon, early this evening. When I looked at the list of speakers and I saw that I was fifth, I thought, they're going to say everything that I wanted to say. So I was sitting here thinking, what can I add to this? And I got here early and had a chat with Tony, who we work with quite a lot. And I thought, well, I know what I can do. I can add a few numbers to some of these discussions that we've had. So, you know, when people say what are the important sort of causes for concern when it comes to plastic production, use and waste, for me, it's size and scale, it's human health, and it's greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the Pew Charitable Trusts produced Breaking the Plastic Wave in 2020, which puts some numbers around some of these issues. But obviously, since then, a lot more detailed reports have come out, going into more depth. And I should say that we are looking to produce that report, or reproduce that report in 2025 with an update as well, in order to move forward. So when we look at size and scale, plastic production is forecast to increase by 66% to 712 million metric tons by 2040. That's based on 2019 levels. The flow of plastic into the environment will nearly double by 2040 to 49 million metric tons per year. That's from the latest Nordic Council report of this year. When we look at human health, plastic production, use, waste is already severely impacting human health, livelihoods, and natural ecosystems. Today, for example, we see higher cancer rates in communities next to production facilities. That's a report by Minderoo. Air pollution due to open burning of plastic waste. And we know that plastic is in our blood, in our organs, and found in placentas. When we look at greenhouse gas emissions, plastics-associated greenhouse gas emissions is predicted to increase to 3.1 gigatons by 2040. Again, that's the Nordic Council report. So again, when we look at this and we look at climate impacts of plastics, what should negotiators be aware of as they advance both international climate discussions and international plastic agreements? And I would say we must address plastic pollution hand in hand with addressing climate change. Why? Number one, the global plastics industry is the second largest and fastest growing source of industrial greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Emissions from plastic production, use, disposal could account for 19% of total global carbon budget by 2040. And I should mention that 90% of these emissions come from the production and the conversion of plastics. In other words, reducing plastic production is therefore a key priority for negotiators in international climate and plastic agreements. And then finally, what is the single most important provision that must be part of a meaningful global plastics agreement? And I hope I'm not stealing any of your thunder here, Inga. For me, there is no single provision. We need measures across the full cycle of plastics, from production to reuse, recycling through to waste management. The treaty must encompass all of plastic pollution. But I would like to highlight three key areas. First is reducing production, supply and consumption of virgin plastics. Doing so must be a binding obligation in the treaty text, or we cannot solve the plastic problem or the climate problem. And there's a great line here, and that is having a plastics treaty that does not address production is a bit like having a climate treaty that does not address fossil fuel extraction. Secondly, is ensuring a comprehensive provisions on the different sources of plastic pollution. For example, not only addressing packaging and consumer goods, but also other sectors such as fisheries and agriculture. And in particular, it must address the different sources of microplastics. Microplastics such as tires and textiles, microplastics form around a quarter of the total global plastic pollution from land-based sources quantified to date. They are a very large slice of the pie. And thirdly, ensuring that a treaty has a robust framework for implementation. This includes the necessary financial mechanisms that facilitate implementation, clear monitoring and reporting obligations so that we can measure implementation and its effectiveness. I have one slide just to leave you with. I just thought for me this was a really compelling slide. It's obviously our greenhouse gas trajectory in terms of hitting net zero, but there is your projected business as usual projections in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from plastic production and consumption. And finally, again, as I said, having a plastics treaty that does not address address production is like having a climate treaty that does not address fossil fuel extraction. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our neighbor here in Building 87, the Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, Inger Andersen, who will wrap up for us. Do you want the mic?
Or I can also stand.
Either, however you like.
Yeah. Good afternoon, and thank you, and very much enjoyed the presentations by my fellow panelists here. Look, I'm going to take you back to the 1970s. Yes, the 1970s, because at that time, there were two scientists. This was Roland and Molina, for those of you who have journeyed that along, who were looking at what was happening, and they theorized that CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and the chloro is what I would like you to be paying attention to, were going into the atmosphere and then into the stratosphere, and in its breaking down, the chlorine molecules would hang out there and would essentially bind with others and break down the ozone layer. And there was really, this was leading, bleeding edge science. And the science was very much disputed. But and there were hearings in the House of Representatives and other places. And in fact, there was also an alliance for responsible CFC policy that was created by industry, led by DuPont. And as late as the mid-'80s, they were given evidence in Congress, in the US Congress, testifying that we believe there's no imminent crisis that demands unilateral regulation. However, the wisdom of the world prevailed. And in '86, I believe, but anyway, it's another UNEP treaty. We have 17 treaties under our belt. So we've kind of been on that battleground before. People get very excited about whether we will land or not. We shall, because we do. But nevertheless, that treaty was enacted, and the cooling and the refrigeration and the foam and the spray can industries, it's impossible. Your refrigerants will not work, and farm to field will get lost, and there were huge costs, etc. But you know what? Your refrigerator still works. And this air conditioning unit, for better or worse, is still running. So my point here is not that necessarily that technology will solve the thing, but my point here is that multilateral action is the only way forward. And when we look at, and these excellent folks here have already highlighted the numbers and all, so I'm not going to go into that. I think we all know it. But when the United Nations Environment Assembly in February of 2022 decided that there shall be a negotiations track and we shall end plastic pollution with a view to looking at, including in the marine environment, looking at the full life cycle. And I want you to hold on to that, because that was the enabling legislation. Not to have a waste management treaty, because I wouldn't be wasting my time on a waste management treaty. It's like, should we have a firefighting treaty? Is it good to fight? Yeah, having fire engines is a great thing. So is waste management. Otherwise, we have cholera, pests, and anything else. And we've lived that in the Middle Ages. We're not going to go back to that. So yes, no, this is not a waste management treaty, although there are some voices that would like to pull us in that direction. But let me be clear, waste management is absolutely critical. I live in Nairobi, where we do not have a complete waste management system, and there's a high cost to be paid because of the flooding, because waste goes into drains, because of all the issues that we see in poor countries. But that alone will not do it, and I think we've heard that very clearly. The Zero Draft was issued by my organization on the 5th of September. It caused quite a lot of ruckus because it did include, as it must for a multilateral base negotiation document, has to include the voices from the full spectrum. And those on one spectrum think, oh my goodness, there is the piece on the other spectrum. And this is the nature of the beast, but just steady as she goes. Stay with us now, please. Don't blink. Be with us. So one of the issues that was included was reduction. And it was obviously very, very controversial in some parts of negotiators. There were other elements that dealt with other things that would be controversial with others. That is the nature of multilateralism. But there are a few things that absolutely have to be clear. One, it's not a waste management treaty. It includes waste management, because investments in waste management for poor countries is absolutely critical. You get your waste collected. Not everybody in where I live do, and it causes great harm to people and their health and the environment. But first of all, after the reduction story, we obviously need to just eliminate. And I invite you to step into your own bathroom, your own kitchen, and just look at it. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And I see plastic pens here on this very panel by some very distinguished people. Why? Time to cut it out. We have to live every single thing ourselves, from the smallest to the biggest. The little cup that is convenient, but no. The reusable pen, yes. And then to the big things, right? I mean, but we have to live every single thing. So elimination in the food sector, in agricultural plastic, and so on and so forth. So elimination, but especially that which is unnecessary. You carry your 5 tomatoes home for 5 minutes, and then 100 to 500 years in the landfill, where it will not disappear, that plastic bag, but where it'll just break down into ever smaller components. That's madness. Because this precious material, oil, we may need it for our planes and our trains and our cars and our whatever else that we need, right? And our electronics and so on. So let's not waste it on things that are completely pointless. So elimination. And that elimination can be done by any way, a number of ways. Bans, and here I want to pay tribute to Rwanda. Rwanda has been on the forefront on the continent, the African continent, and in the world on stepping up on plastic ban. Faustin, when was it? It's like 15 years ago?
Yeah, it's 2008. That's when we established the first law.
Think of that, 2008, the first law, 2008. And because Rwanda set the bar, and then they've strengthened it and made it better. And it's amazing. You visit Rwanda, it is the cleanest country that you will ever visit. It's just remarkable. So real commitment and also mobilization of people. But anyway, bans, incentives, taxation, fines, all of the above, some of the above, depending where you are in the jurisdiction, will have to be part and parcel of the conversation, right? So that we can eliminate or exit. Another point that we have to do, and here industry can really lean in, we need to rethink the product. Does it really have to be liquid? And the answer is absolutely not. From cleaning materials and Mindaru knows that very well, a lot of what ends up in the environment is actually cleaning material, emballage, or whatever, packing, which is madness because it used to be dry. I mean, you're scoring powder, you're washing powder, your bar of soap. It's like complete and utter madness. Now we spend billions to ship water with some cleaning material in it around the world in plastic. How does that make any sense? And the convenience is completely insignificant. 2 pumps for the thing, or 2 turns with the soap, what's the difference? So there's a lot on the elimination side, but there's also a lot of rethinking the product. I'm not pushing a product, but I just want to mention the example of Pepsi Cola, because I'm not pushing a product, but they bought SodaStream. And they're marketing SodaStream, the bubble machine thing, and they're marketing it as beyond the bottle. I mean, that's completely rethinking the product, right? They also have Gatorade, which you now get in a tablet, and you drop it in your, your drinking container. My point here is rethinking the product itself, and it can be done for so many things. I speak to cosmetics, I speak to so many, where in fact you can have the thing, mix it, and do what you need to do to maintain your body, etc. Rethinking the product. Removing the harmful chemicals, 13,000 chemicals, 10,000, who is counting? A lot. Chemicals, some may be harmful, we don't know the most of them, these are protected by trade secret. We need to have a way that these chemicals that are going to be, that we know that they are not harmful, so that if we are going to recycle some of it, and we will have to, that we know that it's not going to cause harm in the next time round. So let's be sure around that. And of course, rethinking, switching to non-plastic substitutes, or alternative plastics. And when I say plastics, I'm talking about non-hydrocarbon elements that would not break down in our environment, but agricultural refuse, cotton stalk, peanut shells, cocoa. You know, there's lots of it out there. You need enough bulk for the industry to take this on granted, but there's a lot that we can do. And then, and this is a message to Xbox and Microsoft, the right to repair. Do not sell things in a sealed, you know, your appliance, whatever it is, your kitchen mixer, your hair dryer, or your Xbox. There has to be a right to repair, that you can take it in and unscrew a bit, and in Kenya they can repair anything. My electric kettle burnt down 1, 2, 3. There was a dude. He came on a motorbike, and the next thing you know, the kettle is working again, because people have ingenuity and smarts. But the point here is we need to think about this and incentivize the right to repair, and then the electronic waste, right? Where does it go? In my part of the world, especially in certain, not in Kenya, but in other places, it is disassembled in unbelievably terrible settings, with fumes and plastic being burned and some of the metals being recovered. This is shameful in 2023. So these materials that are precious have to have systems around which they can recycle, because they are finite, whether it's copper or lithium or what have you, of precious material. So I think those elements are absolutely critical when we say the reuse refill option. I want to celebrate here El Gramo. If you know, it's a Chilean company, a small startup with some funding from here, there, and a little bit from Unilever and others, but a great group of people who have now, you can walk into a supermarket with your container that has a little microchip in it, and you put it in, you press a button, and you fill how much you can afford. Because if you think of poor countries, India, many others, you buy your things in sachets, because that's what you can afford. And the sachet market we have to respect, because it's a question of affordability, but the sachets then go everywhere. So now El Gramo, you go with your thing, and if I can afford this much, I will buy that much. But I will not have a lot of sachets. So we need to rethink. And these are the kind of elements that have to be and are part of all of this. And then there is a justice element. You know, waste pickers, 20 million people, the global sanitation workforce, if you like, in the country where I live, they're the ones that do most of the recovery, but they recover it from unbelievably dangerous circumstances on the dump, with explosions sort of just happening because of the methane and the heat, and maybe you just need a piece of glass that lies just thus, that you get these catastrophic fires and implosions with collapses. And when you climb, as I have done a number of times, those 40-meter high, as far as the eye can see, you sort of apocalyptic landscape of marabou stalks standing there. And this is the waste management of most of Africa. They do not have the engineered landfills, they do not have the leachate channels, they do not have the recycling infrastructure. So we need to really talk about justice. For a long time, we will have to think about ensuring that there is a healthy and fair and just transition for that workforce. And then the financing has to be part of it. In the enabling resolution that was agreed in UNEA, United Nations Environment Assembly, a financial mechanism is part and parcel of it. But I want to make it clear that we are not thinking about a financing mechanism like the Green Climate Fund. We have to think about the enabling legislation that will drive private sector reorientation, just like the refrigeration. Yes, there's a small mechanism associated with the Montreal Protocol, the one that deals with ozone-depleting substances. And it's managed by UNEP over its 30 years or so. It has managed about $3-4 billion. 30 years, do the math. So, and that's important, support to legislation, support to shifts in production, but not building new factories that can produce alternative material. That will be the job of the private sector. And my final point. Some countries have been foot dragging on renewables, really positively foot dragging and promoting coal, oil, or gas. And others have stepped into that space. I come from a tiny little country that was at one point the domination of wind power. Denmark, with 5 million little people, they got the wind power thing because we're in a really windy spot. Now others have taken over the market, And good, right? We need more supply. But my point here is it will be the early bird that gets the worm. And today, who dominates solar? It's dominated by China, but others could have stepped in and would be leading if they hadn't gotten this. So it's time to step in and lead, and that is also where the business opportunities will be. And that is where the future global markets will be, who will come up with smart, because we're going to ship stuff around. That's the way that the world goes. What will we encapsulate it in? How will we encapsulate it? And how will we make sure that it isn't necessarily liquid? There's a lot to be done by the private sector, but domestic legislation at home can hurry it along, or not, as the case may be. But this treaty is coming your way, and we will get success. And I ask for everyone to lean in and help us make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Inger. That was a great way to wrap up, I think. The message is there is a way to do this. It's time to step up and lead. And I'll add to that, if we treat the ocean right, the ocean will help us get there. So with that, thank you again to the panel. Please give a round of applause for everyone. And I'm going to ask the panel to stay up here for a photo. I think that's next on the schedule. Thank you very much.